Welcome back to AM Agenda. Joining me on our panel of politicians this morning, the Shadow Immigration Minister, Scott Morrison. Good morning.
Good morning, Ashley.
And also the Parliamentary Secretary for Employment. Good morning, Jason Clare.
Good morning.
I want to start with you, Scott, just to let you have the opportunity to respond to some of what the Environment Minister, Peter Garrett, had to say there on that green loan scheme. Does the opposition think this should be cancelled because there is such a low take-up of it?
Well, what I think we've seen with either the Green Loan Scheme or the Pink Bat Scheme is there's a range of rushed and bungled programs the government has brought in here. And what we're seeing is a pattern. The government spends money before they think about the consequence of how they're going to spend that money and how the programs are going to be run, or even if they're going to be taken up. I remember from my own former portfolio, the First Home Savers accounts is similar to this other program. It's been massively undersubscribed. They're announced with this great fanfare, but in terms of the take-up, in terms of the follow-through, in terms of the attention to detail, it's just not there. And you can't go around spending billions of dollars of money, racking up billions of dollars of debt, and end up with these sorts of outcomes and expect people to think you've done a good job.
Well, Barnaby Joyce has been talking a lot about the government's debt in recent days and weeks, and this morning he's apparently standing by his claim that Australia could default on its loans. Jason Clare, is that any possibility?
Well, no, it's not. And the Treasurer dealt with that, and he had to be rebutted by Joe Hockey yesterday. Barnaby Joyce has now become a joke. He's like the Homer Simpson of Australian politics. You wouldn't put him in charge of a nuclear power plant, and you wouldn't put him in charge of a $1 trillion economy. Barney the dinosaur would do a better job of managing the economy than Barnaby Joyce. And this has now become a very serious question of judgment, because Tony Abbott, one of his first things he did was put this bloke in charge of finance. And if the opposition are to have any economic credibility at all, if they're to be the party that they claim they once were, then he has to sack this bloke this week. If he doesn't sack Barnaby Joyce, then he shows that he's not serious about the economy and he has no economic credibility at all.
Scott Morrison, what's the coalition's position on this? Joe Hockey's saying one thing, Barnaby Joyce is saying another.
Well, I think Joe's made our position on the government's ability to pay debt very clear.
So
but
Joe Hockey is right and Barnaby Joyce is wrong.
What I'd say is this, though. How are we going to measure people and their performance in politics in this country? You've got Lindsay Tanner, who's racked up $153 billion worth of debt that we all have to pay off, the biggest deficit we've ever had in peacetime, and apparently that is a big tick. That's a job well done. Barnaby has some colourful language and apparently he can't manage the nation's finances. Well, I think what people will be thinking about, as the Reserve Bank Governor has been making very clear, government spending out of control puts up interest rates. That's what Lindsay Tanner's been doing. That's his form in the job. So that's a pretty poor report card.
Let's just look at the timeline here. Yesterday morning, Barnaby Joyce made those claims. Yesterday afternoon, Joe Hockey corrected him. This morning, in another interview, Barnaby Joyce apparently isn't backing away from it one bit. So where's the miscommunication going
I think
on
Joe's
here?
Made the
Barnaby
position
Joyce must have heard Joe Hockey yesterday.
I'm pretty sure Joe has outlined the position of the coalition very clearly. Of course,
so
of course the Australian government can pay back its debts. The problem is, though, the level of debt. And this government has put us into a level of debt that is unprecedented, and it's put in place schemes like the rushed and bungled Pink Bat scheme and the undersubscribed Green Home scheme or the First Home Savers scheme.
For example, puts you in a very tricky position to come onto a program like this and have to try and not slam Barnaby Joyce, who's your colleague, but you're obviously trying not to say the words that he's wrong on this.
Well, everyone's getting very excited about the semantics of this conversation, but the fact is... I'll tell you what the important point is, $153 billion worth of debt. That's how much debt we have, and that's what Australians are going to have to pay back, and our interest rates are going up.
As a proportion of GDP, it's 9%. Compared to the US, which is at about 85%, the UK 92%.
Yeah, that's true.
So is it really as big a problem as you're saying it is?
What was the level of debt that they inherited? Zero. Absolutely zero. No debt.
What happened last year?
Hang on, let me finish. One of the problems that you have by racking up a debt of $153 billion, and when you're spending money on programs in 2 years' time to save us from a recession that was held in 2008 and that's the sequence of events, is you weaken our capacity to deal with any further shocks that come along. So we are now in a much weaker position to deal with the next wave of shocks, should they come. And Jason, I'm sure, would agree that no one knows what the future is going to be. That's the debt record of this government. That's the record of Lindsay Tanner.
Let's let Jason respond to a couple of those things. On the debt and the link to interest rates in particular, we're interested.
Sure. Okay, let's just go back 12 months. Global recession hits. The action that we took stopped Australia going into recession and protected thousands of jobs. There are a lot of people watching the program today that have got a job that wouldn't have a job if we hadn't acted to stimulate the economy. If you take the opposition's advice, then we would be in recession right now. What the opposition are doing is trying to run the typical scare campaign on debt and deficit. When Scott was in front of the Reserve Bank Governor last year. He asked a question of the Reserve Bank Governor about this, and he said, "Governor, why is debt so low?" So there's one argument in a private hearing with the Reserve Bank Governor saying, "Why is debt so low?"
I never said that, Jason. I never said that.
Yes, you did.
Yes, you said that.
Well, after the show, I'll show you what you said. So, in hearings with the Governor, why is it so low compared to the rest of the world? And then out there in the public, running a scare campaign on debt and deficit.
Okay. Well, again, that will be a hot topic in question time today. We'll look forward to that. Look, this is a report that we saw on the front page of the Daily Telegraph today suggesting that the Defence Department's decided to make the camouflage material for soldiers' uniforms in China. Now, the Australian Defence Association is saying this is actually a concern in terms of our national security. The opposition's jumped on this, saying that 400 textile jobs here in Australia are at risk. Was this the right decision, Jason Clare?
A couple of points here. First, the uniforms are being made in Bendigo, a company, Australian Defence Apparel.
The material is in China.
Some of it. The uniforms made in Bendigo. The company's won a $13 million contract over 2 years. $13 million contract over 2 years to make the uniforms. They source the material from, I understand, at least two places. One is from Wangaratta in Victoria, and another is they get some of the material from China. All up, the Defence Department source about $6 billion worth of equipment over the course of the year. And what the most important thing here is to make sure that our troops, particularly our frontline troops, have the equipment and resources that they need.
Scott Morrison, is it just China that the opposition has a problem with, or would it matter where this material was being produced? Is it that we shouldn't have it produced anywhere except Australia?
The Defence Department has specifications for this camouflage material, and there's a spectrum that has to be observed in how it's done, and that basically involves handing over those design details to effectively the Chinese, and that's an issue, I think, of national security. I think it's an issue of concern to Australian Defence Force personnel, and they've expressed that today. And what we see with this government is they never think through the consequences of their decisions. I mean, yesterday in Senate estimates, we had it revealed that the Oceanic Viking special deal was signed off on before they'd even considered the security ramifications, and now we've had 4 refugees transferred in an almost unprecedented fashion from Indonesia to Australia because they just didn't think through the consequences of their decisions.
Actually, whatever Barnaby Joyce has got is contagious. If it's not him attacking China, you've now got Scott Morrison, one of the senior and smarter members of the coalition, now attacking China and saying that there's some sort of security risk here. I've spoken to defence officials about this. It's the same sort of material that you can get on uniforms all around the world. So this argument that there's some sort of security risk is another scare campaign from the Liberal Party.
There's no spectrum specifications that sit with this material. This is camouflage material.
This is the same sort of camouflage material that armies all around the world, sourcing material from all around the world, get.
Has no specific design. They have no specific specifications that they put into these contracts. They have nothing.
The advice that I have is that the material that is sourced here is the same material that is used on uniforms all around the world. Now, the argument you're making is that there should be a scare campaign against China. You sound more like Barnaby Joyce every day.
Okay.
You sound more like Barnaby every day.
Your points on that, I'm sure that is one that the Defence Minister will be under the pump to address today. Scott Morrison, Jason Clare, thank you for your time.
Thanks for your time.
And, of course, we will be back this afternoon with PM Agenda. David Spears will be with you at 4:15 Eastern. I'll see you again tomorrow morning for AM Agenda. Until then, I'm Ashley Gillen. Thanks for your company.